Alright guys, we will keep it brief this time. The last video has more context, but these are the games that did not make my initial ballot. Nothing has been finalized yet, of course, so feel free to try and sell me on which games you think I might be sleeping on. We've got almost twice as many games to get through, so I probably won't be as verbose this time around. Once again, these are arranged in alphabetical order, and I will try to get timestamped down there in the description once the video is up. For now, though, let's get to it. The fact that this game even exists is something of an oddity, but the game itself is incredibly straightforward. Bubsy is an old-school platforming mascot. His games have a bit of a mixed reputation, but you can actually tell that the dev team here on Bubsy 3D, Bubsy Visits the James Turrell retrospective, has some familiarity with the classic Bubsy. They've done their best to emulate that a little bit. He has the very classic Bubsy glide, and a lot of the chapter titles are very on brand with their naming puns and things like that. Of course, this is less of a Bubsy game and more of an art game, as the dialogue will drill home again and again and again. The environments, or installations perhaps, are the main focus. I do feel that they are a bit heavy-handed in drawing attention to that fact, but, I certainly cannot say that this is a game without soul or vision. They, clearly wanted to put on a bit of a display here, and they absolutely did. The execution may leave a bit to be desired, but it definitely is the kind of game that will leave a lasting impression. Another advantage that this game has is that it's short, like, really short. Obviously, the Emer will be able to take their time a little bit more than I did recording footage for the review here, I guess. They can maybe start some discussions with the chat about art or bobcats or whatever they like, but there's no way this game is going to fill even one whole stream, much less multiple. It's the kind of game that would have been a good wheel pick, definitely. Would have loved to see this game show up on the wheel. As a community vote pick, I'm not sure it has the sauce. But given how many games are already on our schedule and how many games might make it out of the community vote, maybe voting for this one so we can get through one of them in under an hour or, an hour or two tops would be a good thing. As always, I am not here to tell you how to vote, but I really couldn't blame you for voting either way with this one. This is one of those games I hadn't really heard about until I saw it on the main roster here. Deathspank is a comedic action-adventure kind of RPG game with an absolute ham for a main character. It has a very distinctive style, and it isn't afraid to poke fun at itself, which I think is a good thing. I really don't know how well the game will perform on stream. A lot of that is going to come down to sense of humor. Comedy games are always going to, hit for some people, but not for others. As far as I see, it does hit the same jokes kind of over and over again, from what I can tell. And the visual style, while definitely distinctive and at times charming, has kind of worn out its welcome with me already. I do respect the game a lot. It has a vision, sticks to it, but as with a lot of, games in this kind of humorous genre or subgenre or whatever you want to call it, there's just a very real chance that it won't click for the streamer. Or that it will wear out its welcome long before the playthrough is finished. I definitely could be missing something here, but the gameplay really doesn't seem to be much of a selling point either. You equip the same gear, but with bigger numbers this time, and, very mild benefits with leveling up and stuff. I'm just not seeing it. I really wish I had more good things to say about Deathspank. I think it would be about a 3 stream game if it was one that won the vote here. So not a huge commitment in that sense, but it is still probably longer than Allison would enjoy playing it. So unless the writing and kind of the chaos of it all really strikes a chord and gets things rolling, I just don't think it'll be a great stream experience. You might hear this a lot in the video, but I think this would be better as a wheel game, something that the streamer can get into for an hour or so and then step away from guilt-free. I haven't actually played it, obviously. I've only watched maybe a dozen minutes of footage, so if you think I am missing something, or if you think I'm not giving it a fair shake here, feel free to slap it on your ballot. Look at this. Look at this panda in a cage. The panda does not want to be in a cage. Do you want to put the panda in a cage? What kind of sadism are we enabling here? Alright, alright. This game, and David Cage games in general, have a bit of a reputation in the Alice and Dara community, but I will try to be fair. Detroit Become Human is an iRobot fanfic shaped like a video game. Okay, maybe that's not really fair. I, Robot is a series of sci fi stories by Isaac Asimov that explores the evolving relationship between humans and technology as the latter continues to progress, particularly once the positronic brain brings robots in line with human consciousness and eventually takes them beyond it. Fantastic series, great short stories. I think everybody should give them a read if you're into sci fi. By contrast, Detroit Become Human is more of like an early Star Trek style of sci fi. It is much less concerned with actual technology and the potential dangers or uses of it, and instead uses the framing of science fiction to shine a light on real issues in our own time. Real issues in this case means racism. The game really, really wants you to know that it is using robots and humans and their relationships as a metaphor for racism. It cannot be clear enough on that point. Really drives it home. It does explore other themes, of course, to varying levels of tact and depth, but the rather heavy handed racism allegory does underpin the whole thing for better or worse. The game is rather pretty, especially considering the time, and you can kind of brush off a lot of the Uncanny Valley stuff as being on theme with the robots and everything. In terms of playtime, you're probably looking at about 3 to 6 streams, maybe more, depending on how much time the Emer's kind of getting through things and how much they're exploring and progressing the plot. As far as weaknesses, well, as I've already mentioned, the game is pretty heavy handed, particularly when it comes to the racism allegory, but just in general. Most characters don't really have a lot of depth and largely exist to fulfill roles, most of those roles being bad guys or victims. The gameplay leaves much to be desired. It is pretty much a walking simulator or a telltale game in that regard. I kind of feel like David Cage should be out here making movies or Netflix shows instead of games, but I digress a bit. There is some story divergence based on your choices. I don't think it is particularly significant, and overall, I don't think Detroit Beyond Human takes great advantage of the medium or does anything really interesting with its gameplay. Your experience may be different. This could be your favorite game, and I would not fault you for it. I know the game has certainly left a positive impression on a lot of the critics at the time, and probably a lot of players as well. It definitely wasn't for me, and I do not think that it is for Allison. In my heart of hearts, I believe that a vote for Detroit Beyond or Become Human is a vote for the Emer to suffer. But if we made it through Deadly Premonition, which is a much worse game, we can certainly survive a handful of DBH streams. Vote as you will on this one, but I'm certainly not voting for it. Alright, this is another one I hadn't heard of before I saw it on the list here. Or if I had, maybe the generic name just didn't really stick in my memory. This is another love letter to a bygone era of gaming, although perhaps not as single minded as Evoland 2 is in that respect. You don't really need a knowledge of Zelda or the Mana series or Earthbound to appreciate this one. The graphics are beautiful and charming, and certainly one of the strengths of the game. Gameplay itself seems pretty solid. It draws from its inspirations while still doing a bit of its own thing. The story seems very character driven, puts a lot of focus on the two main characters that you are actually playing and, their interactions with each other and the world around them. Puzzles seem a bit standard for the genre, nothing there that should trip up the Emer too much or require a lot of backseating. Honestly, the game has a lot going for it. As far as drawbacks, I've heard that it can be a bit tonally dissonant at times. While it is doing some interesting things with the gameplay, I think that it might also get a little bit tedious once you get to the later game and you have to start backtracking through areas and killing all the enemies that you really should just be able to blitz right past at that point in the game. I really don't know exactly where to place this one. I feel like I would want to watch a bit more footage or play it myself before really giving a solid recommendation one way or another. It definitely has potential, and unless I feel like there is some secret sauce on this that I'm not aware of, I think that it is really just what it looks like on the tin and would be a perfectly fine place to place your vote, but I just think there are games that are a little more special and deserving in this list. Fallout New Vegas. This one probably doesn't even need an introduction. It is definitely one of the more heavily debated games in the Alicendera Discord, or at least heavily promoted. It is another game that would have been a perfectly justifiable pick for genre defining games month, even. When I initially saw it on the docket, my reaction was hell no. After our playthrough of Deadly Premonition, I am very nervous about these buggy mess games that have a reputation for crashing all the time and corrupting save files, things like that. But between my research and Primate's campaigning, my opinion has definitely softened on this game. Recent updates and patches have apparently improved the game's stability quite a bit since its initial release, when it gained its reputation as kind of a buggy mess. As far as the open world, sprawling environment with crafting and a bunch of side quests, and you have these huge pockets so you can fit just about every piece of junk you get your hands on. Uh, that kind of stuff is really more of a turnoff to me than a selling point, but that's personal bias speaking, obviously, and even my crotchety old ass has to admit that Fallout New Vegas is a better version of the Bethesda sandbox than most of the games that have followed even to this modern day. Now, getting Allison's takes on the game would genuinely be interesting. I don't think the game itself really plays to her strengths as a player, but it is well designed, has a lot of interesting writing, and a lot of the bones here obviously have kind of been iterated and improved upon kind of as the genre has evolved, and there's really a lot to be said from that perspective. And if this game doesn't win, there's a good chance that Large Primate will evolve into some kind of supervillain, so maybe that's something to keep in mind as well when you are considering your ballot choices. This is a good one. A worthy series favorite for many. I definitely think it is best enjoyed after playing or at least watching Path of Radiance. Well, the game doesn't really start off with familiar faces from the previous game. They do show up pretty quickly, and a lot of the fun, at least, for me and for series veterans in general, is seeing how the characters from the first game have grown and changed during the brief period of time between the two. A lot of the plot beats in Radiant Dawn were set up in the first game and are only being paid off in the second, and while you can definitely figure things out as you go, you're missing a bit of the hype and the build up if you don't play the first game. As such, I was gonna place this a little bit lower on my list, but MSB, the game's primary champion over in the Discord, brings up a good point. Quote, Emer is going to play one wheel hour of Path of Radiance, the previous game in the series. Radiant Dawn is the direct sequel. Going into this with only an hour of context from the first game would be really funny. And that's a compelling argument actually. For the bit has always been a sound excuse in my book, and I know that the Emer will understand and appreciate that. They will probably also spend a bit of time complaining about the situation, but we we take the good with the bad on those, I suppose. All that being said, Path of Radiance has already been chosen by the wheel. If the Emer enjoys it, they'll finish it in theory. If they really, really enjoy it, they'll commit to Radiant Dawn somewhere down the line, just as we've already seen them commit to Final Fantasy X too. Admittedly, I don't think either situation is actually very likely, and while I can't deny that it would be funny diving into Radiant Dawn with only the faintest idea of who all these characters are, I feel like we ought to give Allison the chance to come to those conclusions on her own terms. For me, this vote really comes down to how you think the Emer will enjoy Path of Radiance and whether or not a Radiant Dawn playthrough will be better or worse for their experience with the first game in this series. I won't fault you for voting either way, and if you do decide to vote yes on this one, make sure to let MSB know so you can get your cool Edward ping. All right. So before I started doing my ballot research, the only impression I had of Goodbye Volcano High is that it was a VN made by and primarily for horny furries slash scalies slash whatever the subgenre is. I have since learned that there's a bit more to this game than that. It has rhythm game elements, most notably, and that is definitely something that might appeal to Allison. But I do not really know enough about this game to stake that claim. It is a coming of age story that follows Fang, their title character, or the main perspective character, as they approach graduation. And there's a blend of like visual novel stuff going on where your choices can kind of steer the narrative a little bit, and of course the rhythm game sections with your bandmates. I the character designs are not for me, but the quality of the art is undeniable. The art is very high quality. It's a pretty game if it is the kind of game that you would like looking at. A lot of people really seem to enjoy the music as well. I've seen that listed among the benefits. There are a lot of complaints about the narrative payoffs and the way some of the characters act and do or don't change over the course of the story. I've been trying to be pretty spoiler light on a lot of these games, as you might have noticed, so I can't really speak to the specifics in that case. And honestly, I can't really think of a whole lot else to say for this one, either for or against. A lot of the reviews mention some very powerful emotional moments, but others seem to find it shallow and a bit tedious. It's not a game that I would ever play for myself, but maybe it's the game for you, and maybe the combination of visual novel, which is a genre Allison enjoys, and rhythm games, which is a genre she really enjoys, is enough to sell you on this one. Unbeatable was great. I think that this could be at least okay. I'm really not going to push much for this game in either direction, though. It's probably not making it on my ballot, but you can definitely put it on yours and I won't be upset. Alright, stop me if you've heard this before, but this is a genre defining game that would have been a perfectly reasonable pick for a genre defining games month. Chances are you already have an opinion on Half Life 2. I've got nothing against it, even if it's not really the type of game that I personally enjoy. But if you like first person shooters, and if you like blasting apart aliens and weird science creatures, and if you don't mind a bit of gross out or some old school jank, this is probably going to be a game that you would genuinely enjoy. One of the big selling points of Half Life 2 at the time that it was released was the physics engine, which did some genuinely impressive work for the era. It is one of the first games where you can really mess up your environment and enemies with, well placed shots and weird interactions with different objects and the very iconic gravity gun. I think Allison would have a blast with this game, and I think she'd have a lot to say, both from a game dev slash QA perspective and from a personal history with the genre perspective, and, just kind of in general. It's a very iconic game, and, there's certainly a lot to be said about it. For every nitpick or story critique that I might have with the game, there are probably twice as many good things to say about it, particularly when discussing its role in gaming history and culture. It is so crazy that nobody has ever even talked about Half Life 3 as a potential sequel. I bet that would, I bet that'd sell some copies for sure. Really, the main reason that this game didn't make my initial ballot is just that it's been really well explored already. I feel like that everything that can be said about Half Life 2 has already been said dozens of times. While I know I would personally enjoy the Alice and Dara experience and Allison's unique perspective on the game more than, any other review or playthrough, I'm not sure that that's enough of a selling point for this game. I do want the Hall of Eam games to be special for the community and for Allison, and I'm just not sure that Half Life 2 is that game. Still, you are welcome to disagree with me. The game has some very staunch defenders and campaigners in the Discord. Honestly, it is pretty high up my list for games that did not make the ballot. If you would like to vote for Half-Life 2, I 100% support you. Oh boy, this is the big one. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure: The Seventh Stand User. The hype on this game has been built up quite a bit for a very long time, even though I'm pretty sure that Viewer and I might be the only people who have actually played it. The game is 100% free, and that is a selling point. You could go download the game right now and form your own opinion on it, assuming you have the time. It is a bit of a time commitment, but if we can get through Final Fantasy X, we can definitely get through 7th Stand User. So, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure: The Seventh Stand User is an RPG Maker game set during the events of Stardust Crusaders. You roll up your coolest OC, you scratch your head at exactly what your stand is supposed to do, and then you just crash your way into the plot and stay there until the fight is done. Throughout the game, you have opportunity to jump in and out of just about every big fight in the series. Sometimes it leads to some surprising outcomes that differ a little from what actually happens in the show because a lot of those fights JoJo doesn't have a buddy to come and back him up. Sometimes you also just get yanked back onto the rails, and it's just a chance to play your part in a fun fight. There is a bit of added spice and cameos in the game to appeal to fans of the series and the canon as a whole. The gameplay is, I'd say, fine to good as far as JRPGs go. The main twist in combat is the range system, where different moves are more or less effective at different ranges, and enemies are usually the ones who get to choose what range the fight is taking place at, and they will move, over the course of the battle sometimes, so it gives you good incentives to vary your playstyle a little bit, try different things, all that good stuff. At the end of the day, to be honest, clicking the big number button seems to be a pretty good strategy, especially if that big number button is a medium range attack, so that even if the opponent is at long range or at close range, you are getting some level of effectiveness out of it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That is a that is a JRPG classic, just clicking the big button. And honestly, the game is pretty interesting as a whole, and if you are a fan of the series, I would definitely recommend giving it a look. Unfortunately, I think JoJo's Bizarre Adventure: The Seventh Stand User would spark much less joy for our Emer than Final Fantasy X did. The game is certainly playable if you are not a big JoJo fan, but I think it's particularly difficult to enjoy for folks who either weren't a fan of the series as a whole or particularly were not fans of Stardust Crusaders. I do like the series, and while I find that the pre Egypt episodes of Stardust Crusaders are a bit repetitive and kind of drag on and are kind of cringe, a lot of the more distasteful content has been pulled from Seventh Stand User. You don't have to listen to a new bathroom joke every time we get to a new location, which I I appreciate. I did not find the game engaging enough to actually finish it, if I'm being honest. I shelved it right around the Rubber Soul fight. I imagine our favorite Emer will be even less engaged, unfortunately. But even if the game doesn't end up clicking for her, I think the momentum that it has built up in the community will lead to an overall stream experience that is pretty enjoyable for all parties involved. There's a non zero chance that this game will show up on my final ballot, even despite its flaws, and I think that you should give it some consideration for your ballot as well, even if you are only doing so as a favor to viewer and or for the bit. Okay. The Emer really loves baseball, and I love that the Emer loves baseball. Baseball's pretty fun. I personally find that baseball video games are a bit easier to watch and engage with than the sport itself. Uh, Watching a game of baseball just takes forever. But if you are looking for a baseball video game, MLB The Show is maybe the most baseball that a baseball video game has ever tried to ball a base. If you want to see the streamer pilot the most realistic New York Mets or Seattle Mariners or whomever through a just standard season of baseball, this is the game for you. That being said, I think that if we want a baseball game on stream, we should be looking at something more in the range of Super Mega Baseball or Backyard Baseball, maybe even Out of the Park. The show isn't a bad pick per se. It is just very much a, big sports game, annual release type of game, which I don't find particularly exciting or special. These games do get a lot of attention each year, but it's from a pretty different part of the gaming sphere than, the part that we are typically in here with Allison. And unfortunately, I think that some of the latest games have this kind of card pack gambling thing, which I would really not want to expose the Emer to. I hope that stuff is avoidable. I will kind of rely on the knowers to know. I will also rely on the knowers to pick the best version of this game because it, like I said, it is an annual release sports game, so there are many, many versions across the years. One of them has got to be the right pick, hopefully, one that does not include a gambling game. Despite my initial reservations, I do think that this game would be a pretty good time if it made the block. We haven't really had a sports game on the Alice and Dara channel yet, except F10, of course. Of course, we love the Aurochs. Go Aurochs. It might be a change of pace that would be fun, and it would be a chance to kind of pick her brain on new topics and a style of game that we just haven't really gotten around to yet. It'll definitely also be an engagement engine and a clip farming engine. That much can't be denied. We're going to see a lot of Mets in the chat. Every time we get a home run, it's going to be an event. We'll get to talk trash about a lot of the players. I don't know a ton about the customization options for the game, but I imagine there is some ability to name players after chatters or community jokes, things like that. There are a lot of really good reasons to vote for this game, and I do think that if this game, made the channel, it would be a great time. Ultimately, I just think there are better baseball games that could be picked, and I also think that some of the games that are on this list are a little more special and a little more deserving of my vote, at least. But ultimately, you've got to fill out your ballot yourself, and if you want to put MLB the Show on there, I support your decision. Oh, come on, man. this is going to be really hard for me not to be biased with this one. For those not in the know, the Stories series is an offshoot from traditional Monster Hunter games that falls more in line with kind of JRPG style gameplay and storytelling. And more importantly than that, it is really, really, really cute. I love all the monster designs. In this game, they are called Monsties, which is either cute or cringe. I won't choose. You get to connect and bond with all of these cute little guys instead of just beating them up with swords, which is nice. It is a monster taming game at heart, and you're expected to spend a lot of time kind of harvesting and hatching eggs and tuning the environments and kind of eventually producing the ideal monstie that you want in your party. This game is cute. It is fun. It has characters and plot, which is more than you can say for a lot of games in the Monster Hunter series. There's a lot to dig into with the monster breeding system, the knowledge that Allison brings from her experience with the series, in Wilds and World, will definitely be paid off when she is hatching monsties and deciding which parts to break in battle. There is a lot to love here, and that love almost got this game onto my initial ballot just all on its own. What kept it off then? Well, the time investment, frankly. I know it's not required to spend hours and hours raiding nests for the right egg, and then going back to hatch them, and raise them, and evaluate them, and then release some of them back into the environment to strengthen the local fauna, and then you make better eggs in the future when you go back and you reach and blah blah blah. It's there's a gameplay loop there, and it is one that you can sink a lot of time into. It's a lot. The Emer would basically have to choose between spending a ton of time on this game or doing a lot of off-screen ranching and, getting through it in a couple weeks still. As much as I love this game, I am not convinced that it is worth the screen time, per se, on Allison's already overloaded docket. It is possible that I'm being overly cautious on this point, though, and I really, really do love these games. They're just the best, man. They're so cute. If you want to make some space on your ballot for Monster Hunter Stories 3, I 100% support that decision. This game was right on the border for me. The only reason that it didn't make my initial ballot is the lack of an official English release. Still, the unofficial fan translation is excellent, and it was pretty accessible last time I checked, although that was admittedly some years ago. If this game is playable in a way that does not incriminate the Emer, I think it is an easy pick and would definitely be back on my ballot. Mother 3 is the sequel to Earthbound, a game that Allison has played and is rather fond of. Both games have absolutely earned their reputations as classics and genre standouts. They're very good games. And while Mother 3 is a true sequel in that sense, you don't really need to play Earthbound in order to enjoy it. Mother 3 is lighthearted and whimsical and humorous. It is a JRPG about a party of young folks fighting against an evil army of invaders. For a game that keeps a pretty light tone throughout, it does explore some pretty powerful themes at times. The Emer will laugh, that's a guarantee. The Emer will cry, that is also a guarantee. And the Emer will probably have one or two justifiable crash outs at some point. As far as reasons not to put this game on your ballot, well, as with a lot of games I've mentioned so far, it is a time commitment. Depending on how things play out, it might even take more streams than Final Fantasy X did. Although, if we run long as we did during Final Fantasy X, I don't think that'll be the case. Aside from that, though, and some of the previously mentioned issues around the lack of an official English release, I really don't have anything bad to say about this game. I'm sure that it does have its flaws, and they're just being suppressed by my own nostalgia, but it really is a beautiful game, and I hope that Allison gets to experience it at some point, even if not through the community vote here. If you have an empty spot on your ballot, vote for this game. You will not regret the vote. I think I think some of you guys really want the streamer to suffer. I can't think of any other reason for Pathologic 2 to get a vote here, especially when Pathologic 3 is already on the ballot. If you absolutely have to vote for one of these games, I would suggest 3 over 2. Both are depressing, suffering simulators about trying and failing to cure an outbreak in a small, isolationist town. You will fail, to be clear. You are intended to fail, at least during your first, like, what, 3, 4 playthroughs? It is a game with a lot of heart, to be sure. It has some very clear design goals that it executed on. Those goals are primarily to make you suffer, of course. The games do play around a bit with narrative and perspective in interesting ways. It's also worth noting that there is no narrative reason to play one game before the other. Pathologic 2 and 3 are both, in kind of weird ways, remakes or reimaginings of the first Pathologic game. The designer really has one story that they are trying to tell, and each game is an attempt to tell that story in a different way and with different twists. I'll be honest, I am not going to go to bat for either of these games. A vote for Pathologic, in my opinion, is a vote for streamer suffering, and that's not what I'm here to vote for. Yes, the games do have redeeming qualities, but overall, I don't think either would make for a very good streaming experience on the Alice and Dara Twitch channel. Your experience and your voting priorities may vary, but let's just get to the next one. We love an artsy, queer, psychosexual journey. We really do. And this one is nice and weird. Although I think that might be its downfall in terms of racking up votes. The game is short and sweet, but I do think that makes it a better candidate for a wheel game than a community vote. Obviously, we don't get to pick what the wheel lands on, but you know what I mean. I really do enjoy what they're doing here, and it is a project that has a lot of love in it. I cannot deny that it will be a little bit off putting to some. There is some mild body horror stuff going on that even squeaked me a little bit, and the themes are pretty heavy, even if they are explored in a, I don't know, relatively wholesome and intimate fashion. I'm really not going to tell you how to feel about this one. I think you should do a little bit of your own research on it. I do think it has potential to make for a great stream. And it really would just be one stream, maybe two. But I just think that for one reason or another, that stream might not be enjoyed by everybody. At the end of the day, though, you gotta follow your heart on this one. I absolutely respect the game and respect anybody who votes for it. Hey, I have played this one. Well, I played Black too, but it's the same game. It is the last of the sprite based Pokemon games, and a pretty enjoyable one overall. Whereas Black and White were somewhat infamous for only having local Pokemon available, Black and White 2 brought a lot of fan favorites to the region, and you get a much more diverse selection of Pokemon overall. For those who enjoyed Black and White, it is a rare treat in the series to get to see how characters and organizations have changed over the handful of years between the games. You don't get to see that a ton. I think before Black and White 2, Gold and Silver were the only other games where you could kind of see a character from the previous game growing up and becoming a gym leader, for example, or retiring to go do something else. Barring those few cameos and late game stuff. That being said, this is a Pokemon game. It is certainly a series favorite for many, and justifiably so. It does enough interesting things both with the gameplay and the Pokemon distribution and the story. I just don't personally think it is unique or interesting enough overall to justify a full playthrough on stream. Don't get me wrong, I think it would be a good time. Allison can argue with the chat about which Mons to use. Stella, whoever Stella ends up being, is going to be in peril at all times. And we'll get to hear a certified old head give their takes on this new game. nobody, nobody is allowed to tell her that Black and White 2 are almost 15 years old by this point. But yes, it is totally fine to vote for this game. I think it would be a good time if it makes it on the stream. I just personally don't have the space on my ballot for it. Alright, it's another game I had not heard of before it showed up on the list. Season, A Letter to the Future, is a cute, atmospheric game that would probably last, I'd say, just about two streams, a little less maybe. You ride around on your bike, you take photos of things, you talk to people, and you do your best to kind of fill out the coolest scrapbook that you can. It's a really neat idea for a game. The plot is pretty light, and you really get to make your own path through the world. Every playthrough, especially every first playthrough, has the potential to be something entirely unique. You never know what's going to grab the Emer's attention, what they're going to fall in love with, and what they're just going to skip right past, without even seeing it. As far as negatives, the gameplay does seem a bit stale or repetitive. The world itself, if it doesn't click with you, we could be in for a bit of a slog. Fortunately, the short playtime overall does help with that. I don't think this is a game we're going to see them doing loops on at all, but it is a game that, could make for a couple of good streams. This is another game I would have loved to see as a wheel pick, but obviously we don't get to control the wheel, and I'm just not personally sure that it is worth a spot on the ballot for a full playthrough. The biking being so tame is really one of the negatives for me. When the sequel comes out, I sure hope they include some cool tricks to do with your bike, just so you have something to do while you're going back and forth through the environments and just kind of killing time. As is, though, I think this vote would be totally justified. You can absolutely vote for Season, and it would be fun. I think it's a pretty game. It is definitely one of the selling points is the environments. I just don't personally think that it has the sauce to make it onto my ballot. This is another one that I had not heard of, but I am glad that I know about it now. This is the first game in this category that has made it onto my wish list. The making of Karateka is an interactive documentary, and it is exactly what it says on the tin. Karateka is an old school game from back before we really had genres. Your karate hero character punches and kicks his way through a bunch of baddies and eventually rescues a princess. Pretty exciting stuff, especially for the era. There really weren't many other martial arts games at the time, and the idea of a proper fighting game was still several years away. This would be a great fit for Allison, to be honest. On my initial ranking, it missed my ballot by just one slot. Getting to see her thoughts on the development of such an old game before the industry really took shape will be genuinely fascinating. There are several fully playable versions of the game in the making of Karateka, which would even allow comparisons between different systems and kind of how we had to design games back then around the capabilities of each individual system, which is something you don't see quite as much in the modern era. That being said, I could see the interactive documentary format being a bit of an awkward fit for a stream game. It might be a lot of, watching 5 minutes of video and then going, oh, wow, that's neat, having a little bit to say about it, and then clicking the next video. It's hard to say. I have faith that it would be entertaining, and I think that Allison would have a great time. And honestly, that's all it takes for me. That might be my own particular brand of nerdiness coloring the lens here. There's a very good chance that this game will make its way back up to the main ballot for me, and I definitely think that you should consider it for your own ballots as well. So it's weird. I'm pretty sure this game should have been Xenoblade, one of the Xenoblade games. That's probably what you meant, right? You should let Allison know that it was a typo, and then she can fix that for you. In all seriousness, though, well, Xenogears is iconic and a genre standout and the progenitor for a magnificent series of games that really runs the gamut from, bad to great. I don't think it would necessarily be a great stream game. There is no way this jank has aged well, so unless there's been a remaster or a fan patch and some quality of life improvements and touch-ups to the writing, I don't really see it with this one. Admittedly, my memory might be a little harsh. I watched a Let's Play. I've never personally gone through Xenogears, so my nostalgia for it is tempered a bit. The game's online reputation does not seem to have improved much in recent years as compared to something like Fallout New Vegas. Even a lot of the game's staunchest defenders do admit that you've got to get through, some say, dozens of hours of jank and nonsense to get to the good stuff. I kind of feel like this would be in the deadly premonition camp, where if it was submitted, it will, ultimately cause suffering for the streamer, and in a way that I don't think pays off. You guys are not just trying to make the streamer suffer, right? Like that's never going to be a way to win my vote, but I guess you guys can make your own peace with your decisions. For my money, whatever selling points you think Xenogears has, there are other games on this list that would be a much better vote. I've said my piece. You gotta do you. And that's it. If you've managed to get through the hour-long snooze fest of my first video, and through this one as well, you, my friend, are an informed voter. If you want a reward, you can at me. I will offer warm thanks, maybe a picture of baby if she feels like posing. For now, though, I need to go drink some tea for my throat, and I need to catch up on some of the gaming I've fallen behind on. Uh, it's been delightful doing this for all of you guys. Take care.